much better. All right, it starts out like this. I got an email a couple days ago from the Comics Guarantee Corporation, CGC, and it was talking about a signing, and it was talking about all the different things you could do on the signing. I'm going to quickly review these ones, and I do mean quickly, so thank you for that one, guys. And this is just going to be an instant repeat for folks who came in now. So going back to graphic number 1. I love this. All right. Graphic number 1 is up on your screen right now, and I'm going to put it up on my screen for a moment because I just actually closed Photoshop. Oh, this is lovely. Okay, enough apologizing. Let's get back to work. So, a guy named Joy Van Wade, I hope I'm saying his name right, a British actor, and CGC is holding one of their signature event series options. The idea is that you've got people that they know that the person is who the person is, so that when they sign your collectible for you, you will actually be getting something from that person. So Joy Van Wade, who plays Victor Stone, aka Cyborg, who's in Doom Patrol, who's not actually in Doom Patrol in the comic books, but apparently they put instead of the robot type character, they put Cyborg from the Teen Titans into Doom Patrol on the HBO series. And so they decided to... yeah, sorry about that. Yes, if Pete edits at the beginning, time sure we'll miss some classic chat. Excellent. So... anyway, so Cyborg here, if you want to, you can send in your comics to CGC, and they will send, allow him to sign your book for you, and they will witness that this is actually an authentic signature of his, and they will slab it, forever in plastic, along with a special seal to let you know that yes, that really is a guy who's not actually in the comic signing your comic, as a collectible. So I thought, well, okay, this is interesting. It's kind of funny because the guy doesn't do the comic. He's not actually in the comic book. But, what the heck, man? There's a lot of people need work right now. So, who am I to beef about it? Anyway, but then I looked at part 2. I said, well, what does this cost? And what this costs is it starts out at the low price of $130 per item. For $130 per item, you get Joy Van Wade's signature. You get expedited turnaround time of 3 weeks for CGC grading, expedited turnaround time of 6 weeks for CGC grading and CCS pressing. Pressing, by the way, is as they refer to the CGC website, a top secret trade secret of how to make paper that has bends in it become flat. I cannot speak from experience from this because this is, as they point out, a trade secret. But I have worked in enough industrial shops that I have a very, very strong guess as to what might be involved with making paper that has indentations or non-flatness in it become flat. Anyway, but they, for an additional $20, they will do that for you. They also will, so for an extra $20, they'll press it for you, and then they will encapsulate it, which is to say stick it in a plastic frame that you can't open again with CGC's iconic yellow signature series label, which is there to guarantee, like a stamp, that he really did sign that thing. It isn't some guy pretending to be Joy Van Wade. It really was Joy Van Wade. But wait, that's the starting position of $130. For $195 per item, you get all that, plus not just his signature, but an inspirational quote from Joy Van Wade. I'm not sure what sort of quotes he's known for. It could be life-changing. It might be well worth the extra $65. I have no way of gauging that right now, but that's an option. For $170, instead of the quote, you could get merely an inscription, which I'm guessing is at least $25 less inspiring. It maybe just says like Excelsior or Go Get 'em Boys or whatever the thing is. And then again, add on an extra $20 if you would like your not quite flat comic book to be made very, very flat. And but good news is there is also the all-in price. The all-in price is $235 per item. It includes everything above, as well as not just the signature, not just the quote, but also the inscription. And yeah, $235. Now, that's actually not quite the all-in price. The all-in price includes your shipping there and your shipping back. They make you pay both ways, as well as any insurance that happens during that time. But if that's something you want, that's something you can buy. So that's a thing. Well, anyway, I'm reading this this message from CGC, and I'm of two minds in the whole thing. I really am, because I mean, on one hand, I'm pretty libertarian by nature. I'm thinking, like, if adults are buying, something that, they know what they're getting into, who am I to tell them what they should value and what they don't? I mean, look, I'm not in the market. I don't really do CGC much myself. I don't really watch the show. He doesn't mean anything to me. I mean, look, if he was my kid's hero, and I could, my kid's favoriteest comic book in the entire world was, Teen Titans or something, or Doom Patrol, and I could stick one in there and get it signed for him, maybe this would be just the thing. I mean, I don't know. I mean, and I really do believe that if someone's selling an adult a product, whether you think it's good for them or not, if adults buying it, an adult is getting what they paid for, and then everyone's honest about what they're delivering, then, well, who am I to say? And at the same time, I felt really wrong about this whole thing. It really left me feeling kind of creepy. And I started thinking about, well, why am I having this reaction? And I had a lot of time to think about it, because I'm sort of spinning up ideas over the week, and I started really busting down, well, what are the areas that make me feel kind of dirty about this whole prospect? And I had a lot of thoughts on it, and believe it or not, I want to get through this in an hour, so I'm not going to go into most of them. I actually want to explore just the idea of the signature end of things. I'm going to leave off two other major topics. One is what it means to be a pro and going pro, and everything that's involved with that, and how fans act with pros, which is it's a whole separate topic. It interleaves with this one, but it's not quite the same. And then the other one is, I do want to talk about CGCs and the world that they're in, and what's involved with that as a separate topic in a third podcast. But right now I want to talk about signatures, and I'm going to warn everyone, especially everyone who put up with this lack of sound at the beginning of the show. I have about 3 minutes of content about the actual value in dollars and cents form of signatures, and my thoughts on that. And there I'm speaking out of just a guy who makes a price guide, who looks at a lot of market data and says what things are selling, and what are they selling for, and what have I observed in the market from my vantage point. I'm not speaking ex cathedra on any of it all. On everything I'm about to say, I could be wrong. But if if you want just the dollars and cents thing, I'm going to get to this in just a moment. Beyond that, though, I do want to talk about a lot of the other implications of what signatures really mean to us as fans, what it is we think we're buying when we're buying a signature, and how that's all playing out in the market. And I will warn you, it does get fairly philosophical on the whole thing, and there is a non-zero chance that I will be talking about hookers at the whole thing. So do hide the kids, and if you want to dial out in about 3 minutes and go watch something else on TV, no problem at all. I will absolutely buy it on that one. But let's get into it. So, so these guys obviously think that, getting a signature from this guy is worth, and a scroll or whatever else, that adds at least $130 to the value of a comic book, plus having it graded. I don't know that is borne out in the market whatsoever. People ask us a lot of times, well, okay, I've got comic book X, but my copy is signed. What's that worth? Do you have a guide for what that's worth? And our answer has always been, no, we don't have a guide for what that's worth, because any number of people could have signed it. And as we prove, people who aren't even peripherally involved with the comic can sign it. Your little brother apparently can sign it. Brad Pitt could sign a comic that has nothing to do with Brad Pitt. Apparently these are all fair game now. And all of us, of course, at some point have had little kid sisters who, or whatever else, or just your neighbor Billy from across the street who signed all his copies of his comics, Billy, across the front of them, because he didn't want you to forget to return them to him at the end of the whole thing. So we can't say just off the top of the list. First of all, it's impossible to make a price guide for signatures. It can't be done. There's one thing we can all agree: we can't really agree whether a comic book that's been signed is immediately more valuable or not valuable. It depends on so many factors, which I'm going to get into. But while that is true, the one thing we do know is that when I sign a comic book, I have 2 copies of Catwoman, and I sign one of them, I've taken the signed one and I've made it unique. I've made it different than your run-of-the-mill Catwoman. So now suddenly this is a different beast than the one over here. So what did I really do with that? Well, in pure dollars and cents terms, I think we have to say that, okay, we did a couple things. First of all, we made this comic book rarer, right? You know, there are less of these than there were of those, right? You know, not every comic book that rolled off the lot, is signed. So, okay, rare's a thing. Is the signature worth more or less? Well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I've had experience with, and let me see if I can find my notes on this exact one here. Yes. So, again, we always say, like, for instance, if our neighbor Billy signed his name on the front of his comic books, it clearly didn't make that one more valuable. We consider that one quite a bad defect, all things considered. We've definitely dealt with issues where we have been selling comic books on Atomic Avenue just through my own shop, where I've had 2 copies of some 1990s thing, and it was signed by the inker of whatever the thing was, and we've had people go get the signed copy because it was the only one we had left. We had 5 copies of the whole thing. The only one we have left is the signed one. And actually return it to us and said, well, this one's got writing on it. And we'd point out, well, it was signed by the inker, man. And they say, yeah, I don't want it. I want one that doesn't have the writing on the cover. I'm like, okay. And you'd think if the one guy was crazy, well, yeah, I gave you something that's more valuable, right? Except he's not. You actually get that comment enough times that you're like, okay, this is not necessarily a done deal. A lot of the value of the signature relies on the status of the guy doing the signing. Stan Lee, quite a bit more status in that world than, say, Art Mouse doing, the signature on the whole thing. It also matters quite a bit whether or not this guy is known as someone who signs a lot. Like, for instance, Stan Lee, or Sergio Aragones. If you happen to leave paper in his vicinity, I've actually done this. I've had a bunch of comic books in my hand, laid them on the table. I just bought a bunch of grooves and everything. I laid them on the table along with my laptop and a bunch of other things. Was just talking to him, saying, "Hey man, how's it going? We were just doing blah 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 over at the ComicBase booth while we're here." And I'm not even noticing because I'm looking at him, and I go and I pick up my laptop again. I realize he signed 3 of them, because he just works like that. A Sergio Aragones signature is cool. It's cool for me because that happened to me, but it's not going to be one where you sit there and say, wow, never seen a Sergio Aragones signature before. Because again, if there's scratch paper in his general vicinity, it probably will have been signed by the time you leave, pick it up again and doodled on. And so forth. And also the demand for signatures is very uncertain. There are very few people who say, like, man, I just need a signed Stan Lee anything. I'll buy a Stan Lee, like one of the things he did with Stan Lee, invents, with DC, creates the whatever else. Yeah, you can sell those as special editions, but honestly, the market's super uncertain. It's not necessarily a lot more than just the regular copy of that one. I mean, it's kind of cool. It's kind of cool to a number of people because at least people have heard the name Stan Lee, but it's not at all certain how much more that brings in. And I would also wager that if you took the letterer or the inker off that same book and had him write on the whole thing, it would bring exactly $0 more than the original signature. So that's kind of like the dollars and cents of the whole thing. The answer is, in pure financial terms, you can't really know. Different collectibles, garner different value for signatures. A signed football from the Super Bowl is worth quite a bit more than a football that you simply know was played with at the Super Bowl. But it depends very much on who the starting quarterback is. Is that guy still playing? Has he gotten traded to a team that nobody likes anymore, and so forth. But it's kind of a random deal as far as that stuff goes. But let's talk about what we're talking about when we're really saying, when I sit there and I get a signed collectible, what am I really buying? And go into that a bit. So I want to say, first of all, I want to take this, I'm sorry, it was one other note I made to myself. I said before I get into this one, everything I'm about to say here is going to indicate a certain attitude about money that I've got as a middle-aged dude in my 50s. And also it comes from a perspective where we're talking about freaking comic books. We are talking about one of life's awesome things that nobody needs, right? I would also say the same thing applies to guitars and sports memorabilia and almost everything else that you would ever have signed. But we're not talking about the groceries, right? If we were talking about the money for the groceries and things like that, I would be having a different discussion for you here. But we're talking about, really our own connections with pop culture and our own connections with our life like that. And so I do think it is more emotional at its core, and that's going to inform a lot of what I'm saying. So bear that in mind, just for whatever it's worth. All right. Before I want to talk about why do fans want to sign things, I want to talk about why do artists sign things to start with. I mean, who's the first guy who ever said, "Let me pick up a pen and scribble on that, that 8x10 glossy," or old movie stars, it was used and rock stars. It was very common for kids to come up to them with little notepads, and say, "Would you sign my thing?" They hand them a pen and they scribble in a little notepad, and you'd eventually have a notepad, full of signatures of people. I've seen notepads like this from people who knew the Beatles back in the early days. And it's actually really cool to see because it was just such a fan thing. You just caught up to them as they were walking out of a club, and they would sign as many of these things as they could before they got mobbed and run away to the next thing. Why do artists put up with that, right? I mean, it's why go through all the hassle of signing stuff? Well, I think it really comes back to the artist. Is it gives you a way to connect to your fans. The people who really make it exciting for you to be in this industry. It gives you a way to connect to them, and very importantly, it gives you a way to connect to them while not giving away the thing that you do. Now, I want to take most of what I have to say on that aspect of things and put that into my next live stream where I talk about being a pro. But it turns out it's really, really important if you are going to be talking to fans that that you have some part of yourself that you can give them that isn't the thing that you give away for money. If you never want to mix that part that you do professionally with the fan part of it, because it quickly poisons everything. But if you have a movie star who's coming off the set and he goes and he signs an 8x10 glossy for a fan, or if back in the old days before the internet, people had fan clubs, and David Bowie would sit there forever, just let me sign as many 8x10s and cassette tapes and whatever else as I can, and send them back in the self-addressed stamped envelope. It gives you a way to connect with your fans that really is very rewarding, despite the wrist cramp it gives you at the end of the day. Garth Brooks, from my neck of the woods out here in Nashville, famously, one of the things that absolutely made his bones when he was out in town was the very first time he'd gotten done. He'd kind of taken the town by storm, singing at a little place called the Bluebird Cafe, which is a hole in the wall with about 6 seats in it. It's a little singer-songwritery thing, and he made quite an impression with this very, very small little crowd. Well, I believe it was that same year he got invited out to the Country Music Awards, and suddenly, he's starting to chart. He was starting to get to be a really big dude, and he was near enough, early enough in his career that he, as far as the legend goes, and I could be getting it wrong, but hey, as they say, when in doubt, repeat the legend. He wasn't on the bill. There's a little. Country music is very famous for being very fan friendly, but he wasn't on the bill with a little tent, to have people line up all day long to get signatures from Reba McEntire and all the favorite country artists. That wasn't, he was too new to be in there and whatever else. So what he did is he basically showed up, brought his own tent, set up on the whole thing. Someone figured out Garth Brooks is signing way the heck down there, and they basically formed a line, mobbed him, and he sat there for, I want to say it was like 20 hours. He basically signed until the very last person went home. He just, worked his hand off, signing, whatever people brought him to sign. And that made him an absolute legend amongst fans. I mean, country music people will typically, they will follow an artist until that artist is in their grave, unless that artist does something to completely flip out and disrespect the fans, whatever else. I mean, but they will put up with bad albums. They will put up with janky cover art. They will put up with terrible covers of Fleetwood Mac songs. Whatever the thing is, they will put up with that guy forever, as long as the idea is that fandom is given back on the other end. And that's very much. In the golden age of Hollywood and things like that, even though you had, people were very much moguls and very, very much stars that were very separate from the fans, they're finer folks, who really had traditions of having, great fans, would take a certain amount of their time and give it back in terms of just a connection to the people who made them famous in the first place. And, signing something for a fan is a really great way to do that. It's, it doesn't take any time at all. And problems if you get 10 trillion fans asking for it, it does get burdensome on the whole thing. But, they eventually worked out ways through things like, book signings and things like that to kind of make that manageable. Well, why do fans stop, why do artists, if it is such a wonderful experience by and large for artists, why do they stop doing it? And for this one, and by the way, I'm just out of paranoia, I'm just going to check the chat real quickly and make sure we got the thing. Excellent. you know, why do fans stop doing it? And for me, I'm going to just tell you one story that represents, I'm pretty much sure it's almost everyone's story. And I'm not even going to say it's the one that turned his mind on, but it's certainly the one that would have turned me around. Is I'm sitting there and I'm waiting to, you know, kind of chat and just, you know, kind of say hey to Peter David, you know, the guy who wrote the Hulk back in the 90s. And, you know, comic conventions were much lower key back at the time. You could just, you know, just wander around. Artist Alley was not the hot place to be, you know, necessarily, and you didn't necessarily have to pay $1 jillion to get into the show and so forth. It was a really good way to just actually meet the people who made the stories that, you know, that you liked. So, you know, you kind of like, okay, if you want to take a moment, you know, snap a picture of Peter David for ComicBase or whatever else, and just say, hey, you know, because we were both writing for Comics Buyer's Guide at the time. You know, I thought, you know, hey, you know, how's it going? You know, from, you know, I'm the guy on page 28 or something, and, you know, say hi to the guy who's on the back page, you know, because he wrote a, you know, was it, but I Digress, I believe was the name of his column. Every page, everything in the back page of Comics Buyer's Guide, I was the guy writing the pricing column. So I just thought I'd say, hey, there's two guys ahead of me. One guy is, you know, the guy immediately ahead of me was just a little kid, you know, he's got a, you know, copy of Hulk, you know, clearly he loved this thing to death, you know, in his hands, and he's just waiting for Peter David to get it free, and Peter David is like chatting with this other guy, and this, you know, as the guy's chatting, the guy pulls out a satchel, and in it are probably 60 copies of the Hulk, and the funny thing is, a good dozen of them, Peter David was not even the author. You know, he had no, you know, he had no, you know, implication with that whole thing, and I didn't see it happen in front of me, but I know he's talked about in the past. You know, that people have brought him up things to sign, and he'll be like, "Dude, I'm not gonna sign something I didn't work on." You know, and the guy's like, "I don't care, man. It's like you sign it, becomes more valuable." But anyway, so Peter David's looking at me. He's looking at the, you know, the little kid and everything else, and you know, and he just is like. You know, you know, I guess he figured, you know, I'm putting words in his mouth here, but I figure he's at the show, and he just, like a pro, starts signing things until Mr. Satchel goes and eventually takes all his stuff, puts in, at which point Peter David, like, shakes his hand off, signs the one book for the, for the little kid, you know, says, says some nice words to him, and then about 10 minutes later, I finally actually get a chance to chat with him. But anyway, that kind of thing causes artists to say, good grief, what the hell am I doing here? Because you're not talking to a fan at that point. I mean, the guy was clearly going to be, you know, having some kind of play with selling signed collectibles, probably on eBay or something like it at the time. You're not getting that feeling of mutual respect in the whole thing. You just kind of feel used, really, the whole thing, especially when the guy, you know, and again, I didn't see him do that with this particular guy, but, you know, when the guy comes up and says, I want you to sign something, it isn't even something you worked on. I just think I can transmute, you know, base metal into gold if you sign it. You just feel used by that. So different places start, you know, putting different limits so that they don't wear out the fan. They don't wear out the stars. You know, bookstores over time have gotten less permissive about letting people just bring in any old thing and get it signed. You know, typically it's like, okay, well, we're going to load up with a million copies of whatever the author did, and you know, buy a copy of their new thing, and then maybe you can sign. You know, they'll sign that one thing for you, and maybe if you're really nice, we'll let you sign one other thing that you brought with you. Typically, they won't let you just do what Satchel Guy did, you know, to Peter David the one time. But, you know, it can get worse than that. I mean, the easiest way, if you have too much demand for something, then there's too little supply, the easiest way everyone goes is just to add money to the mix. So you go to sports convention, it was shocking to me when in the 90s, first time I went to something where they were doing sports cards, they had sports heroes there, is that every single one of the players, and like the third baseman for the Orioles or something like that, you know, would be like, oh yeah, it's $30 for a signature. They're like, what? You're charging for signatures? Are you kidding me? You know, and it's like, what the heck? I was just so used to that whole bookstore and comic, you know, model where it's like, no, I mean, like, if we want a guy to sign, you know, he's there promoting his latest book or his new series, so he's doing a little bit of a publicity tour. We're going to take him out to dinner, treat him nicely, and maybe pick up his cab fare and his lodging if he's a big dealer who came in from out of town. But by and large, this is just kind of like a fan service kind of give back sort of deal. Suddenly, in order to manage the fans going, you know, the other way on the whole thing and just to manage whatever else, it suddenly got very commercial. And then it suddenly lost that aspect that made it really special, which is that you were giving someone back something that isn't what you what you sell for a living. Suddenly this ancillary thing you do is suddenly part of what you sell too, and I think you lose something in the process. All right, so quick check of the chat just to make sure. Okay, Donna Meg, sweet. So and then finally that all culminates, where does that end? Well, it ends with actors who get $235 per signature to, scroll on your book. So, I mean, that's where we're at today on that. So, let's now take the other end of things. Why do fans want to get things signed in the first place, right? All right, well, there's a bad reason, and then there's some complicated and I think very worthy reasons. The bad reason is you think it's inherently more valuable. So if I have a copy of whatever comic book I've got in my life, Catwoman 28, and I have, whoever wrote or drew it, sign it, this one feels more valuable than the one over here that I didn't have signed. Okay, well, maybe, again, it's very dodgy from a pricing perspective, whether that's true. Like I say, just writing on something doesn't necessarily make it more valuable, but at the very least it makes it unique. Now, when things become unique, then we enter a strange realm where, again, its value is set not by any kind of aggregate of supply and demand, because there is only one now, right? At least if it truly is a uniquely signed book, if it's not something where 500 of them got signed, right? You can't average out all the people who want the thing with all the supply, because there is only one. So you just have a question: is there one person who wants your unique thing? Now, look, the reality is that's rarely the way it goes down. Usually if somebody's signing one of something, they're signing a lot of something, and especially if there's money involved. So if we do have the idea where, yeah, sure, send out your whatever foo, and this guy will sign it, or stand in line at the convention, and for $30 an item he'll sign whatever your items are. Well, guess what? There's an infinite supply of those things. It just means that there's a $30 base price built into whatever the initial ask is for them. That's all that changed on it. Now, that's the bad reason. Let's talk about the good reason. And the good reason, and again, I warned you, this does get a little philosophical. It's based on fantasy, which is to say, when I have a book signed by a guy, I look at that later, right? Especially if I'm not the guy who had it signed, right? If I look at someone else's signed book, someone else's signed copy of The Godfather, signed by Francis Ford Coppola, there's a little scene that plays out in my head, and the scene goes something like this. It says, "Oh my goodness, once upon a time, Francis Ford Coppola was walking down the street. And this guy ran into him and says, 'Oh my God, Mr. Coppola, I love your movie. Would you bother signing my copy of The Godfather, which I just happen to have in my pocket right here because it's always with me.'" And so he whips it out. Coppola shrugs, whips out a pen, says, "Sure, kid," writes Francis Ford Coppola, on the DVD, and then they walk off. That's kind of like, that's some version of that movie is playing out in your head whenever you see a signed anything, is that there's an authentic moment where the person who had it signed actually met the person who was the creator. They shared a moment in time and space together, even if it was just a brief. You cornered them outside a restaurant for a second. You did whatever else, but you actually shared. You walked the same place that person did. You shared a moment in time with them. They signed your thing for you, hopefully give you a wink and a nod, acknowledging that, your existence as a human being in their world, and you got to say something nice to them about, like, "Oh, I love your work, blah, blah, blah," and so forth. There was a little mutual admiration moment there for just one moment. You met on the same level for just a second, and then you parted your separate ways. That's the fantasy. Well, look, as we all know, the fantasy is rarely that, right? So, it could be a reminder of a moment where you did meet that great person in your life, or that you were really excited to do, or it could be any number of other things that never quite mount to that whole thing. All you really know for sure, if I see a signed "what's it" from a guy, and this is the absolutely dispiriting truth. If I say I've got a signed copy of X, right? Well, all right. Assuming it's not just a forgery, right? And that's immediately, that is a major point, a sticking point. But even assuming it's not just an out-and-out forgery, what does it mean that I have a signed X from this guy? It means once upon a time, that guy encountered that object, scribbled on it for a second, and gave it to someone, and somehow it found its way into your hands. That's it. It implies none of the fantasy. None of that little movie that's going through your head all the time necessarily happened at all. As a matter of fact, I'm going to actually go out on the limb and say for most people, it's never the movie. It is so rarely the movie. The movie is really the regressive case on all these things. It really just means that somebody got out their pen, signed a bunch of things, and at one point in time, those things found their way to into your hands. Now, it needn't always be like that. I always said, if you make it a personal practice that you never, get signed things unless you actually met the guy to sign them, well, then those things are going to mean more to you. The movie's going to be more true to you. But it is the fantasy is not necessarily the same as the physical object, and I'm also going to say the value of the signed object is clearly captured entirely in the fantasy. The physical object, for people who don't share the fantasy at all, a lot of people will just look at it and say, why is this one scribbled on? Right? It doesn't mean anything to them. It only means something to them with the fantasy of that little mini movie of meeting the creator and having them share that moment. Now, if you get the moment, then it's great, but if not, it doesn't. So, all right. So if that's the sad truth, why am I bothering with signed books? I mean, why have a signed copy of this thing up on my wall, or that I exhibit, or whatever else? Well, for a lot of this whole thing and a lot of human stuff in general, it's status signaling. Now, okay, that sounds really shallow and awful, and as human beings, we are shallow and awful. Almost everything we do, from the moment we get up in the day to when we get home at night, has some element of status signaling. I mean, the fact that, believe it or not, I spent a couple seconds trying to get my hair appropriately messy, before I went on camera, is something that says, like, I actually care that I don't look absolutely schlub-like when I come in here. I actually spent more than a quarter of a second trying to figure out what type of black t-shirt should I wear today so I look appropriately cool on video. We do that stuff all the time. But if you want to get just the condensed version of how much of your life is put into status signaling, look at your Facebook feed and just go through every one of the messages in your newsfeed and ask yourself, how much of this guy's message, when he's talking about, what he ate, pictures of his food, where he went, how much fun they were having, etc., how much of that is really just a way for them to say, look, I am the kind of guy who puts, is the kind of person who everyone would find attractive and engaging and interesting and whatever else. But what you're doing with all that stuff is trying to put forward that image of yourself. Well, if you have a signed item and it's on display, let's face it, there's a big element of status signaling saying, hey, I'm cool. I'm the kind of guy who would have met this guy, who likes this kind of thing, who would have it up on their wall, and, and so forth. That is a big part of why the signed thing is cooler than the unsigned thing. Now, I also think it's worth noting that the kind of guy who isn't ever going to put that stuff on display probably gets a different charge out of the item. But for a lot of us who do have signed whatevers, it is a big part of it. We can't ignore that there's an element of saying, yeah, I'm cool. I'm the kind of guy who would have this sort of thing, or who would have met that sort of guy. Now, the status signaling thing, it can fail. The fun part is, for instance, if the creator is not high status, or if you have a signature is not very sought after, or so forth, it can absolutely fail. I mean, I think about the person who wanted to return the copy of Night Stalkers or whatever else, which was signed by the inker of the whole thing. So, well, I want one without writing on it, right? The guy saw absolutely no additional status to be gained by having a signed, or at that point it felt like a scribbled on copy featuring the inker's name for Night Stalkers. But the absolute worst thing of all, though, is when you're trying to show off something you've got and nobody even knows who the person is. At that point, you've displayed your status, saying, "Look, I'm the kind of guy who would have this," and the person's like, "Who?" And at that point, you just confused everyone, and you actually probably take a little bit of a dip in status. But I think that's a lot of the game we're playing. But one thing I want to point out is, so of all the things you could ever get signed, and this is like a pro tip on personal status signaling, sports memorabilia, obviously. If you have a squiggle on a football, guess what? A football player probably signed that. Same thing goes for a baseball, or better yet, guitar, right? So let me tell you a little bit about this guy. So this is, you know, signed by Billy Idol. Wow, cool, right? I typically do not buy, like I say, signed things. But you know, I'll hit this one in a second. But you know, I'll talk about the Billy Idol guitar in just a sec, because it's got a good story attached to it. But if you do have a bunch of signed guitars in your house, cool thing is you'll look like, hey, this guy hangs out with rock stars. He must be cool. So, you know, that's a bonus. Now, a little bit of a detour here, and I didn't know where to put this into the whole thing at all, but I did want to hit it, because it hinges on an excellent point that my wife, you know, brought up as we were talking over this at breakfast a couple days ago. She said, well, you know, Pete, a lot of people these days don't go for signatures. They just get a selfie with the star. I'm like, you're right, they do. And I thought, well, what does a selfie give you? Well, all right. You think about that whole idea, that mini movie we've got of meeting your hero, and they said, oh, you know, sure, get in here, I'll sign your thing, right? All right, well, a selfie proves you really were there with the guy, right? So that's a bonus, right? You know, you don't have that doubt anymore. You have no doubts as to its authenticity, right? If I could take a picture of myself with, name famous dude, let's go back to Garth Brooks, right? I got a picture of me and Garth Brooks. If you're in country music at all, you're like, holy crap, is that Garth Brooks? Yeah, that's me and Garth Brooks. Like, because we're, everyone does the grip and grin, like you're all bros, right? And everyone knows, come on, we've seen the whole attitude where, like, if you're a star, everyone knows how, it's called the grip and grin. They put their hand around your shoulder like this, doesn't even need to touch. They kind of go in for the handshake and everything, and a big smile, just like that. Grip and grin. Everyone knows how to do it, and if you're a pro, you can get the whole thing done in about 3 seconds. Pat on the back, on to the next one, right? Everyone leaves happy. But anyway, for me, if I got a selfie of myself up with, Garth Brooks or something like that, it's like, look, clearly Garth Brooks. Clearly I'm a cool guy. He didn't sign it. I'm not selling the thing off on eBay, so he doesn't feel commercially exploited on that one. Maybe I grabbed a bit of his time, but at least he doesn't feel like, and I'm also had this guy's going to sell off the selfie on eBay. So that's kind of a good win on the whole thing. But there is a problem on this one. Big problem on that one is selfies lack that whole framing thing that things like objects like comic books or sport, album covers or sports memorabilia have, in that if you can't recognize the dude in the picture, it's just sort of like, hey, Pete's shaking a hand with an old guy who's kind of lost his hair. Wonder who that is. Maybe it's his crazy uncle. I don't know. You just kind of move on and ignore it, and at which point, again, the social status signaling has absolutely failed. Anyway, but again, pro tip, if you want to go in for, having high status signed foo around your house, if you have one that carries its own frame with it, generally going to be more successful on just the social posing. Anyway, let's talk counterfeits for a minute, because the very first thing that, everyone's got. Oh, I'm sorry. Brief point that also occurred to me as I was writing up my notes. If you're going to have selfies at a comic convention, you might have noticed that a lot of people take selfies not with comic creators, because almost nobody knows what comic creators look like. I mean, could you guys pick Adam Kubert out of a lineup? Garth Ennis, Joe Jusko, any of these guys. Could you pull them out of a lineup? Most people can't. But you know what people do is they'll pose with Catwoman. They'll pose with Batman, right? It not only makes for a good picture, but everyone gets like, hey, you're at Comic-Con with Batman. Way to go, Batman. And so even though it's a cosplayer playing the whole thing, he's happy to be recognized. You're happy that you got a picture with Batman. Everyone walks away happy. Funny thing is, the people who are really, really, really good at cosplaying, who do that a lot, they've actually now gone pro to the point where, like, they will go do their thing, and so many people will go and say, hey, I want to hang out with name of person who dresses up as Catwoman a lot. She actually will have her own booth at Comic-Con or some other show like that, where she will charge you $10 to do the grip and grin or whatever else, and to take a picture with her. So yeah, at the end of the day, whenever the supply gets short, or whenever the demand for a particular thing gets too aggressive on the whole thing, people are going to gatekeep, and it's going to tend to be done with money. Anyway, that was just a funny thing about to me. So let's go talk about counterfeits. All right, a counterfeit on any of this stuff is, I'm just going to say, it's basically just anything that pretends to be something that it is not. right? So if I say this is really a signed ball from Joe Namath, and it is not actually been signed by Joe Namath, that is a counterfeit ball, right? But the same thing applies to anything else. Look, the whole idea, the valid part of the idea behind a certified signature series is the idea that anyone could pretend to be Stan Lee, right? His signature is a little bit iconic, but it's basically, Stan Lee, right? You practice it for 5 minutes, almost anyone could dash off a decent enough Stan Lee signature. And for that matter, most of the other guys' signatures look like absolute squiggles. So the idea of a certified signature is that, hey, all right, look, you got a comic book, you claim it was signed by this famous dude. Here, we can prove it, right? Whereas, the ones that, it can't be proven, hey, for all we know, it's just some guy who's scribbling out trying to make money on eBay. For all we know, this has actually got to be treated as a defect. So that is the thread of legitimacy behind the signature series idea, is that, look, we watched the guy sign it. We checked his ID before he sat down to sign all our books for our signing thing, so we really know that really is Joyvan, whatever his name is. So we're sure he's good. So yes, we will proudly put our stamp on this thing. So we've added value, says CGC. I'm gonna say you can have counterfeits. All right, for instance, the FBI has estimated that 70% of all sports memorabilia is counterfeit. It's just a guy ordering footballs, off Amazon, getting them in, dashing off something that looks a little bit like Joe's Namath's signature, and selling it off on there. FBI is the number that they use is their median number of 70%. The numbers have ranged as high as 90%. So if you're buying a whatever off eBay, very, very excellent chance it's fake. So it is not what you think you're buying. And again, I want to be very specific about what is I think I'm buying. I think I'm buying something that at least was touched by Joe Namath's hands. Whether or not it was actually a ball he ever played with in a game or not, it depends on the claim made on the rest of the listing. But at least you're thinking, hey, like in the old days of the ball games, where your kid could run down to the bullpen with a ball, and Butch Weiniger from the Twins would just sign the thing, and you could pass around the bullpen. The players will all sit around and just sign the balls for the kids and everything. We're buying that, right? Chances are, if you're buying it on eBay or one of these other venues, excellent chance what you're really doing is buying a fake. So that's a real concern. But the other part of the concern is I do think there's such a thing as being functionally counterfeits, even though they're real. And so let's go back to the guitar. All right, story behind this guy, right? And let's see if I can get that right there. So that is, as near as can be done, that is as near as I could say Billy Idol's signature. Now, why would I say it's Billy Idol's signature? I could barely read the damn thing. I say that because the person who sold it to me was a neighbor who worked in the entertainment publicity department of a record company at the time. Was moving out of her house, needed some money, and she had various signed things because she got to do artist tours, and she, because she plays in this area, knew enough to have someone sitting next to her taking pictures as she hands them the pick guards, which is the little part next to where you're playing the guitar, to Sharpie over the whole thing. So yeah, next to this thing, when I bought it off her, it was like a couple $100. Honestly, I looked at it as just, I'm helping a friend who needs money to move. I didn't really have a burning desire for a Squire Strats signed by Billy Idol. The idea is, yes, I think that really is his signature. I think he really did touch and sign the pick guard. Now, everything else about it, on the other hand, is an absolute fraud. So, let's start with the whole thing. The picture, he's signing the pick guard. This is that piece of plastic right here. Now, the reason you sign the pick guard is because hauling the guitar into a concert or whatever else for him to sign is kind of cumbersome. It gets banged up. It's kind of a pain in the butt. Whereas, like, this little piece of plastic right here can be unscrewed and screwed on in a couple of seconds. And it's way easier to sign. You just kind of shove it over the table in like a notebook. He gets out a Sharpie, signs the whole thing. You say, "Thank you, Mr. Idol." And, you take it home, you screw it on your Squire Strat where it came off, and you're done. All right. The other problem is that this is a guitar. And think about what's the movie that goes through your head when you're sitting there looking at a signed Billy Idol guitar, right? Well, unless you know something about music, or a little schooled in guitars, the little movie that comes in most people's head is it's like, holy crap, Billy Idol? Signed guitar? Dude, you clearly hang with rock stars, and clearly he was shredding out on stage. And decided, hey man, you're cool, let me give you a guitar, or some version of that story. Like, here's a guitar that he would be shredding out with, and let me, let me sign that for you. You're practically can hear the notes of White Wedding as you see this thing go by, right? Except if you know anything at all about not just the way signing goes, but the way music goes, is you say, wait a minute, unless this happened at my kid's 12th birthday, where I'd just given him his first guitar, there is zero chance of that scenario ever happening, because a Squier Strat is a $99, it's a 3/4 scale guitar. It's meant for little kids with tiny arms to be able to hit the notes up and down the whole thing, and work it very easily. It's a great starter guitar. No way in freaking hell would Billy Idol ever be caught shredding with said Squier Strat, unless, again, you just happen to invite him to your kid's 12th birthday party. And the rest of the other details on the whole thing have nothing to do with that little mini movie. So what's the real story? Pete had a buddy who was in the music industry who kind of dealt in these things. He threw a couple $100 her way. She gave him a guitar. It hangs on his wall. Every once in a while it makes him feel a little bit cool, but everyone who knows anything about it knows the story is nothing like. That's the story of Pete's Billy Idol guitar. So what am I saying with this whole thing? I'm saying that even though it really is the thing it pretends to be, it really isn't the movie in your head, right? The fantasy, right, the thing that gives it all its value isn't there. In all its particulars, it didn't happen. And that's on something that I really know the story about this one. I actually have a photo to prove the story of what happened with this one. The story of the baseball you bought off eBay, or the comic you bought off, CGC or whatever else, it could be anything but you're pretty good, set to say that what you're buying is probably a counterfeit in terms of it doesn't match what you think it is, even if that's not what the person selling it to you told you. It's very easy to lead people into thinking an item is much more special than it is without actually lying to your face, but just not getting into the details of exactly what went down to have that collectible get there. I think if someone had sat there, you discovered a signed copy of Francis Ford Coppola's Godfather, but you found out that it came off of something like the CGC setup, whatever else, I think you would look at it as much more transactional in nature than the little movie that runs in your head when you think about it. Now, I have a couple more things I want to say about this, and we're going to wrap up. But, so, look, I think things can be fake, right? The question is sometimes, can the fakes, even though you know they're fake, still have value in themselves? And I'm going to say, yeah, absolutely. Right, so they can actually, be authentic to your own conception of what they are, even if they're not authentic to, the conception that's typically peddled about them. Let me give you a couple of examples about that. Looking behind me here, these are some of my favorite robots in the world. I mean, I just dig them. This guy right here, this thing is sold by a company, was sold by a company called Schilling. This is literally my favorite robot of all the robots I own, and if you look around my office, I have dozens and dozens just in display cases. He is by far not the most valuable, robot I own. I just like him. Anyway, this guy, when he was new, cost $25. He's a reproduction based off of a design called a Astro Strider or Star Strider, made by a company called Horikawa. Later sold to, I want to say, Metal Forge, but in the 80s over in Japan. But he has a Genesis that goes back to the 50s and 60s. The funny thing is, you can actually go and buy the originals now. Those look like this. So you just saw the $25 version. This is the $850 version. That's him right there. Same deal. You can absolutely see it. Same mold, same ideas on the pressing and so forth. And honestly, they're only different from each other in 35 years. This is another one right there. So it got sold under different names, but same kind of deal. It came in different paint jobs. Typically you'd paint the outsides, the insides different colors, but depending on whatever was running out on the production line and whatever you guys were feeling during that production run. But the stamps were all the same and so forth. So yeah, they made a bunch of them. That being said, I like mine better. I like my $25 fake, Schilling robot better. I mean, if I bought the $850 one, number one, I'd be scared of breaking it. It's been around for a lot more years. It's a lot more fragile. You know, the box is obviously beat to hell on the new one. I'm sorry, on the old one. The battery compartment, you know, who knows if the leads that, you know, allow it to walk and rotate and fire its lasers and all the other cool stuff it does, who knows whether those would work or else. Look, I'm happy to take the $25 one. I also, if I'm, you know, down at the beach and I want to look halfway cool, I'm happy to buy a fake copy, a fake version in the style of a Foster Grant sunglass for $8 off the guy who's always got the fake designer everythings out there because I forgot to bring my sunglasses with me from home. You know, as long as I'm clear what I'm buying, I absolutely can find value in the thing that you're selling me, even if that thing isn't true to being what the original was, right? Because it really has to do with, like, what's the value in my head? What's the movie going on in my head when I go and I pull up, you know, the shilling robot and I look at it? For me, it's all about the whimsy of myself being a kid, right? I don't really feel a deep connection myself because I didn't grow up in that world of being, you know, joined in history with somebody who made, you know, robots in 1960s in a Japanese factory on the other side of the world. That doesn't, as close as I come to that is watching old Gigantor reruns, you know, from my old black and white TV when I was a kid. But that was literally a world away from me. It isn't part of my childhood. But the first time I ever saw a really cool robot like that, and I knew that something like that existed, I wanted one. But I wanted one so I could relive my childhood, not the hit point in history where the original existed. So, for that matter, if you've got a reprint of Avengers #1, but you discovered that, you know, when you were a kid in 1990, it may be worth just as much or more to you than if someone actually gave you a copy of the real Avengers #1 that's 30 years older, you know, and nominally worth thousands and thousands more dollars, right? But the one that actually would recapture your childhood is the one that, you know, that first gave you that magical feeling yourself. It isn't necessarily the one that was true to history. So it's a fake, but it's more real to you because it's part of your history, not the original history. And look, I think that's legitimate. I think, you know, anything that connects with you authentically on an emotional level, and again, doesn't try to pretend it is something it is not. You know, it didn't say, I am the original 1960s model of this thing. It says, hey, I'm a cool robot. I'm built on an old Japanese pattern, but I am a reproduction. Schilling's absolutely clear about that. They say so just on the box. But yes, I love that one quite a bit. Look, just to wrap up, you know, I think where we get mad is when we are sold something that we think, you know, when we pay for the real thing and we get the fake. You know, so if the vendor is giving us what they say they're giving us, and they really are being straight about it, at that point the whole thing becomes more philosophical. And here's my bottom line on this whole long rant. And I do appreciate you all following me through the whole thing, especially you guys who put me through the silent movie version at the beginning of this one. Look, I'm not talking about, again, the grocery money. So, and you know, let's assume that your rent's been paid for the month, your mortgage has been paid, and we're simply talking about pop culture types of things, the sorts of things nobody actually needs in their life, but which give our life kind of their texture and their meaning. I think the common factor for me is all the things that I really adore, the possessions I really cherish. The real value to all those possessions isn't in the object themselves. They're in myself. I mean, the value is really in me. It's already in me already, but what the object does is it summons that part of myself. You know, for years I wore a $20 Mickey Mouse, you know, watch. You know, I'd be wearing an $800 suit with a $25 Mickey Mouse watch on my wrist because it had a gold tone to it, which I'm sure was practically spray paint. But it looked cool enough, but it also gave me that little edge of being whimsical in a world where I was working, where everyone else was very straight-laced. It's kind of like wearing funny socks. It did the same thing for me in a way where I could still play as one of the big kids while secretly knowing, you know, I had an element of whimsy to myself. The $25 watch I was wearing still is the one I would look for in a way that, you know, a Breitling would not be. But the thing that really gave that object its value wasn't clearly the watch itself. It was the idea of connecting with some aspect of yourself, whether it's a memory, a feeling of whimsy, a feeling of command, whatever the thing is. That thing's already in your head already. You're paying for something you've already got, and the object is simply something that summons it. I do think that's worth paying for, but notice, I mean, I would say that is an eternal truth of all these sorts of objects, is the thing that makes them valuable is already in you. Even money. You'd say money is the most tangible of all things, right? It's like once we get down to the point where we're selling things for money, haven't we given up on the idea that this is emotional? No. I'm going to say once we've dealt with life's necessities, money is doing something for most of us. Someone figured out that once you've paid your first, whatever the inflation equivalent version of $30,000 is, money actually, having more money than that does not correlate with having higher happiness. Once you're not in debt, once the rent's paid and so forth, having more money allows you more flexibility, but it doesn't correlate with higher happiness. What money tends to do for you is it allows you to feel, things that again, there are things you desperately want to feel about yourself. I'm shrewd. I'm the kind of guy who can make a good deal. I'm the master of my world. I'm the kind of guy who does things that are valuable, so people will pay me a lot of money for my time. See, I feel important when people hand me money. I can feel very charitable because now I have money I can give to people, and I can feel like I'm doing something. Whatever those things are, they're all emotions that you're seeking to have, and money is just the enabler that lets you get to them. Again, this is money after you put food on the table. Below $30,000, not having money, very much correlated with being unhappy. But beyond that, realize that money itself is emotional. All right. Because money is just the ability to buy things that make us feel better. I mean, they let us do the things our heart, buy the things our heart wants, and all of our hearts will be different, right? There are different things that will speak to you in a different way. There are different things that will, that will sum up whatever needs are or whatever the dreams are you have for yourself. And so I have nothing against spending the money to buy whatever it is that makes you feel good about your life. I mean, that's the whole point of money. Is you're essentially, money at its core form is a little part of your life that you've bottled up and you've exchanged in turn for a token. I spend hour after night upon night upon night of my time, which then gets turned into comic software, which then gets sold to people, which then comes back as money, which then lets me buy things that I want more than I wanted my time, right? My money is my bottled up time used as an exchange good. That's what it is for all of us. It's our life in little transactable chunks. So look, I do think you should use your money to buy things that your heart wants, and whether the thing is a copy of your old UFO lunchbox when you were a kid, a signature, for your kid's favorite comic book to get the whole thing. I think you should get whatever it is your heart wants that you think will make you the happiest, and what that thing is going to be different for all of us. I always kind of joke, it's a joke that's not a joke. You tell it to your daughters, it's like, you say this is a patriarchy. It's like, yeah, guys earn more money than women do. It's like, all right, well, there's about a million ways I could take apart that stat, but I also would say, just depending on how much I feel like annoying them, I say, well, have you ever noticed that whenever guys get money, we spend it on women? Because probably throughout all of human history, the thing that men want over almost everything else is we would like women to want to spend time with us and bring everything with us that women bring that's wonderful. But yes, go and pursue the things that you think are going to make you happiest. I don't care whether it's a bigger house or a signed copy of Atlas Shrugged or whatever the heck. Just that's what it's for. It's a way for you to exercise your time and trade it for dreams. But I would say, make sure you think very carefully about when I'm buying whatever the thing is, what it represents to me, and then make sure that what I'm buying is really going to give it to me. And this is really my final point about it, there being fakes and faking yourself out. If I go and I buy, a signed copy of whatever that collectible is, and that little mini movie starts playing in my head again, I gotta really think about, okay, what I'm paying for is all the feelings that movie gives me. I'm one of the cool guys who would have hung with this person. That that person would have given me a little bit of their time and said hi to me, or whatever the thing is. Whatever that little mini movie gives you on an emotional level, make sure that whatever that collectible, whatever that signature, whatever that is really delivering on what that movie is telling you. Because one of the worst feelings you could ever have is to wake up the next morning after the urge to just buy the shiny thing is past, and realize that you just kind of bought the shiny thing, but you kind of feel empty inside because the movie's a fake, and the thing I bought fundamentally is a fake, right? So be careful, right? And that's kind of about it. And anyway, I'll save the hooker's comment for another time, but that will come up. I promise you. I have a note to myself which I'll laugh about later on this one. Final thought is this: people have actually done research on happiness, and fundamentally that's what this whole topic is about. It's why it's gotten so philosophical. It's about being happy, and a really good guy on the subject. I want to say he won a Nobel Prize in this, but I could be getting the credential wrong. Was giving a TED talk. I forget the guy's name. It might have been Danny Kahneman, but I doubt it somehow. He basically summed up, he said, what is the essence of being happy in life? And he says it basically comes down to being able to tell stories about your life that make you feel good about the story. So what it really comes down to, if you want to say, I had a happy life, or I've done things with my money, with my time, with my efforts in life, that, you know, it all adds up to being happy, is, do I have a lot of stories to tell about my life that are interesting? And because all these things we buy, all the comics we read, all the collectibles that we surround ourselves with, and things like that, because they're all little stories. Every time we glance up on the shelf and see them, we know the little movie's going to play in our head just for a second. Make sure it's telling a story that adds up to something where you're going to add up and say, that was a good life. That's my final advice on this one. Next time we'll be a little bit more open on this live stream. Thank you for listening, and I'm going to edit the heck out of the front of this podcast, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks again. Bye-bye.